It's Jason Haynes here from QPL Rural here, and today we've got the pleasure of speaking with Emily Stearman. That's correct, is it, Emily?
Yes, absolutely, Jason.
Yeah.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. And Emily's our district vet, all the way out of Wagga Wagga with the Local Land Service. And today we thought we'd speak with Emily on pregnant and lactating ewes and nutritional management, because that's obviously going to be a topic. As people are heading into cropping, we're pushing our sheep over into the corner of the paddock in the seasonally dry conditions. We just need to be looking after those ewes and they're, in some cases, unborn babies, and setting them up for the best growth going forward, especially with lamb prices still being very, very strong. We need to be setting those ewes up to do the best job for us. So, Emily, with the seasonally dry conditions at the moment, just take us through some basic ewe management, ewe nutrition at the moment. What should we be looking out for?
Yes, I guess obviously ewes either on the point of lambing or have lambs at foot at this stage across the Riverina. We're pretty limited in basically any feed available, so a lot of people are either fully feeding or supplementary feeding at the moment. I guess there's sort of a few key things to talk about in that process. I'd probably sort of summarise that, I guess, into making sure they've got an effective roughage fibre source, because a lot of that dry grass is fairly sparse at the moment. Obviously, energy is the key in late gestation, early lactation. And then obviously we do have some mineral supplementation, things that are pretty important, especially when we're utilising either old cereal stubbles, hay and grain in that sort of area.
Yeah, very good. And Emily, let's talk forage, because that's probably the most common way. Traditionally, stored forage reserves, feeding them out at this time of year to supplement sheep. Forage quality is obviously critical to intake, and therefore the amount of energy. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, I guess we kind of have two types of roughage. A lot of people last year made a fair amount of canola silage and make silage, I guess, annually across the region. And then we've typically got our cereal hays. There's, I guess, two things to consider. With your hay, digestibility is key. So really coarse, fibrous, low digestible hay tends to sit in the gut for long periods of time. Are you with twins or triplets, particularly if they're in good body condition score, has quite a limited gut space left basically for feed. So large, bulky, dry feed masses tend to sit in there for a long period of time and often really dilute out the energy that they're getting from that feed. In terms of silages are often typically of a higher quality, so higher in protein and energy, but the moisture content in those silages can further dilute out the energy and protein in that. And again, a similar principle, if you've got gut space occupied by a large amount of liquid, then it kind of reduces their intake and ability to be able to keep up with their nutritional needs in late gestation.
Yep. So the key to feeding forage is, these girls have got limited intake capacity. They've got high demand on energy. So your best quality hay, you've got a forage
high
approach,
digestibility. And if producers are unsure of, basically how digestible their hay is, which, I mean, there are standard figures, I guess, out there for different hay products, but they vary very much on each farm and each crop specifically. So getting a feed test up so that you know what you're working with, that's something, I guess, for another topic of conversation, but to know that feed tests are available there to help with those decisions can, I guess, take away some of the, back of the notebook calculations kind of thing.
Yep. So the other side of the equation there is grains.
So we need to find a source. We need to find a source, I guess, to try and concentrate some of that energy. So we've already sort of covered a little bit that you've got basically a reduced gut size to be able to flow feed into, but we've got a higher energy requirements. Obviously, the two kind of are counterproductive against each other. So concentrating the energy tends to be something we go down the path of, and that's obviously supplementary grain feeding here. We tend to have quite an oversupply of cereal grains and often lupin seed as well. So, producers will predominantly want to utilise what they have on hand, and I guess we can go through some of the inherent risks or, feeding processes with that.
Yeah, so, I mean, and that's probably something we probably should touch on, that, how do we transition an animal in, and what's the best way of going about it? Like, just putting feed into feeder doesn't necessarily work with ewes. Some of the dominant ones will just sit there and eat. Go through some of those practicalities as well, please.
Absolutely. So I guess, kind of preaching to the converted, most people understand that with grain comes a risk of acidosis. So that's when they basically have a really sudden introduction to the grain, or they're consuming too much grain, and they basically change the pH in their gut, which kills a lot of the good bugs in their gut and then sets them up for a pretty, nasty condition thereafter. So gradual introduction is the key, and that's the same with any introduction of a new feed. Starting off on quite a low introduction of grains of around your 150 to 200 grams initially per head per day is sort of a baseline, and that's only in the face of having an effective roughage there so that they can balance out the two feed types. Different species of grain also have a different risk for acidosis and require, I guess, a little bit more attention. So typically, the less husk on the grain, the higher risk it is for acidosis because it's more rapidly broken down in the gut. So things like oats, then barley, then wheat tend to flow in the order of sort of low to high risk. We've then sometimes got access to lupin grains, which are pretty good in energy, but I guess they have the added benefit of being pretty high in protein, which is not, not a specific thing you really need to increase protein in late gestation, but the lupin grain can have the added benefit. So, sometimes mixing lupins with the cereals is an option for producers. And I guess then in terms of how we're feeding it out, you do have the option. Some producers have one or the other, others have both, where you could either have them in feeders and basically control the level of grain able to come out as needed by the ewes. Alternatively, trail feeding, and I guess there's pros and cons for both. You probably do tend to get a little bit less wastage in your feeders. You can basically have to factor in about sort of 30% more grain than what you're wanting the animals to get when you're trail feeding, just through wastage. And otherwise, obviously, they're trampling over it and all sort of trying to get to it. So sort of 30% is, a generous level of wastage to consider when feeding out your grain. A lot of producers will find that they think trail feeding can cause mismothering when you've got lambing ewes. I think, depending on who you speak to, there's very different opinions on that on the ground. Obviously, if that's the only way producers have of getting the energy into them, then, sometimes it's fighting one evil for a lesser evil, basically. Yeah,
the benefits outweigh the risk in that circumstance.
Yeah. And look, I mean, it does vary on an individual basis, and absolutely there's lots of considerations to do with both. But yeah, they're definitely, both options are a potential in the area.
Yep. Now I'm going to start with the end first. You spoke there about starting off at about 150 odd grams of grain and then sort of stepping your way up. And we had a previous conversation a moment ago. You said, I asked you where the top end, and your suggestion was get some individual advice based on your ewes, based on your feeding conditions. Ring somebody like yourself and do a proper budget on how much you should be feeding out every day. Is that right?
Absolutely. So the energy requirement will change depending on basically the weight of your ewe and what body conditions she's in, and that will therefore determine obviously the amount of energy that they need. And then depending on the type of supplement you're giving them, obviously that varies in energy availability as well. So marrying the two together is really the only way of getting advice specific to your flock and your animals. But in terms of generic stuff to take away from today, if you start at that 150 to 100 grams, you can kind of bump them up sort of 50 to 100 grams every 2 to 3 days. And that gives the gut, I guess, a couple of days at one level, and you can sort of keep stepping it up from there. Up to half a kilo or more is often required in most of our sheep across the area. So you're sort of aiming around that, and obviously needing to factor in some wastage on top of that as well.
Factor in some wastage, and there's probably not quite as much paddock feed available this year as what there has been previously as well at this time of year. So.
Absolutely, and I guess that's probably where the quality roughage comes in, because we're not going to be able to cover the whole deficit of energy by grain without causing other health issues in the gut. So we're trying not to increase the grain, I guess, beyond probably what we normally feed each year, but really focusing on trying to find a good roughage source at this time of year in these conditions.
Yep. All right. Well, that's good. Minerals?
Yeah, yep. So what producers often do when they're grazing crops or stubble is they'll have calcium, magnesium and salt out. A lot of cereal grains tend to be mildly deficient in calcium, and that flows through either in crop or in cereal hays as well. So where a ewe's diet is predominantly cereal hay and cereal grain at this time of year, when in the conditions that we're in, they have a significant need for calcium supplementation to cover that deficit. So calcium is important for uterine contraction at the time of lambing, and obviously milk production as well. Essential for those little lambs to grow and thrive, as well as mum to not get sick, basically. So clinical signs at the moment across the region would be very prone with the supplementary feeding to not only pregnancy toxemia, if that energy deficit is still there, but also calcium, low calcium hypocalcemia.
Yeah, it's probably a part that in the past people have sort of missed out on that pre-lambing nutrition, but it sets that ewe up to lamb down well and produce a good amount of milk going forward, and really give that lamb that best opportunity and that best start to life out the other end. It's really
Absolutely.
A sound investment for it. Yeah.
Yep. And if they can survive to their best potential through that late gestation, then obviously their energy requirement actually goes up once they're lactating, and so they'll then subsequently need to be fed according to that. But the big difference then once they've lambed is you've got more gut space to work with, so they can actually physically eat more, which tends to help with lactation and that sort of thing. And obviously, the reason why there's lots of recommendations on having them in sort of a 3 or slightly better body condition score at lambing is they can then utilise body condition effectively by breaking down those body reserves during lactation, so that you're putting the most into their lambs.
And I suppose too, genetically, like ewes of today, they're bigger, they're bred for twinning and things like that. Their nutritional, there's no free lunches here. Their nutritional requirements are a lot higher than probably what they were 20 years ago, just through breeding.
Absolutely, yep. Generally across our region and definitely other regions, we do have much bigger crossbred ewes than they were 10, 15 years ago. So, yes, they do have a higher energy requirement. They tend to be often highly fertile, and so the more babies they fit in there, they often then will reduce significantly the ability to consume large amounts of feed to meet that energy. So they particularly are prone to risk of disease. Also, having those ewes in way too heavy a body condition score, so around your 4s and 5s, just puts too much stress by the time you put the weight of the lambs and stuff on top of that as well, puts too much stress on their body, and you can often have health effects with that. Unfortunately, if that's the case at the point of lambing, there's not a lot you can do to change that, and cutting their energy out at that time only makes things worse. So I guess body condition's probably a whole nother conversation in itself, in a way.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Just in terms of the mineral
yeah.
supplementation, I probably didn't really go into that as much detail as producers would maybe like. So obviously calcium is pretty important as we start to get cooler conditions. Our soils do tend to become limited in magnesium. Magnesium's pretty important in terms of lactation and muscle activity as well. So magnesium and calcium supplements throughout lambing and particularly through lactation are pretty important in our area. A lot of those we add salt to. Obviously, if you're mixing them yourself, we add salt to for palatability. But yeah, there's various loose licks. Lick blocks do tend to be a little bit lower in concentration compared to loose licks, but yeah, loose licks and various other products across the region to supplement the ewes through that period of time. And I guess if producers are after specific advice in that area, then again they can touch base with us or other nutritionists, basically.
So most people are feeding out of a loose lick in a trough or something like that rather than incorporating with the grain. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so when trail feeding, to cover the deficit that I guess is existing in calcium in the cereal grain, you can add 1.5% ground limestone to that. Some producers don't like that option because it can then clog up machinery and stuff like that, being quite a fine powder. So yeah, you can trail feed with the 1.5%. I would always advise to still have loose licks out as well, just to ensure that there's full range of availability so that they've got all access to get it, basically.
Yep, no, sounds good. Sounds good. All right, well, I think that's given it a broad covering, Emily. Nothing else you wanted to add?
No. Look, I think if that helps, that's good. And yeah, I guess just if there's any more specific questions, we're happy to help.
But I think that's important. I think everyone's circumstances is going to be a little bit different. So I think contacting the LLS and somebody like yourself is an absolute great way to, have your feed evaluated, have your animals, get a proper nutritional budget for your animals and make sure you're doing the right thing by them and getting them set up for that lambing and post-lambing period.
Yep, absolutely.
Very good. All right, Emily, well, thank you very much for that, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Have a great day.
Thanks.